Picture yourself standing at a grill with a fresh cut of meat in front of you. It looks perfect, smells incredible, and you've done this 1,000 times before. You cook it, sit down, eat. Simple. But here's a question that sounds almost childishly obvious at first. Why is that meat from a cow and never from a lion? Not a wolf. Not a tiger. Not a shark. Humans have hunted and eaten animals for our entire existence as a species. So why does something stop us cold at that particular line? Most people assume it's just cultural, a taboo. We just don't do that. But that's only the surface. Underneath it sits a biological reason, a chemical one, and something buried so deep in your evolutionary memory that your body already knew the answer long before science ever confirmed it. And the last part of this isn't really about predators at all. It's about you and what you're actually made of. Start with the obvious question. Could you even eat a lion if you wanted to? Technically, yes. It's not poisonous the way a mushroom might be. You wouldn't drop dead from a single bite. Some people, historically, have eaten lion. Some hunters have eaten wolf. There are documented accounts of people cooking bear, alligator, shark. The meat exists. The option is on the table. But almost no culture on Earth ever built a food tradition around eating predators. And the reason comes down to one of the most elegant rules in all of nature, the 10% rule. Here's what it means. Every time energy moves up a step in the food chain, roughly 90% of it disappears. A blade of grass captures energy from the sun. A deer eats the grass, but only keeps about 10% of that energy. The rest gets burned off as heat, just keeping the deer alive and moving. A lion eats the deer, and the same thing happens again. The lion only retains about 10% of the deer's energy. So by the time you're sitting at the very top of that chain, you're essentially feeding on the leftovers of leftovers. Think about what that means practically. A lion needs to eat somewhere around 15 to 20 pounds of meat a day just to survive, an enormous cost paid down to keep a single animal alive. Now put yourself in the position of a prehistoric human, hungry, weighing your options. Risk your life fighting a lion for 15 pounds of low-energy meat, or go after the deer instead, at far less danger and far more calories per effort. The math was never close. Prey, not predator, every time. But here's where things get stranger, because the energy math is only half the story. The other half is invisible, and it's sitting inside every apex predator alive today. It's called biomagnification. Toxins enter a food chain at the very bottom. Pollutants in water, heavy metals in soil, chemicals absorbed by plants and tiny organisms. A small fish eats thousands of those tiny organisms, absorbing a little toxin each time. Not enough to hurt it, but enough to accumulate. A bigger fish eats thousands of those small fish, and now the toxin is more concentrated, still survivable. Then a predator fish eats thousands of those medium fish, and the concentration climbs again. By the time you reach the very top of the chain, the toxin load isn't just a bit higher. It can be millions of times more concentrated than it was at the bottom. This isn't speculation. It's documented, measurable science. In 1966, scientist Charles Worster studied eagles dying off in large numbers around the Great Lakes. The eagles weren't being poisoned directly. They were eating fish, and those fish had absorbed DDT, a pesticide, passed up through everything beneath them in the chain. By the time it reached the eagles, the DDT concentration was so extreme that their eggshells were cracking before the chicks could hatch. The eagles were dying, not from what they themselves ate, but from everything their food had already eaten before them. And that's exactly what sits inside every predator today. Mercury, lead, PCBs, synthetic chemicals the body can't break down, all quietly accumulating in fat tissue over a lifetime. You've actually already brushed up against this yourself. You've probably been told to watch how much tuna you eat. Not because tuna itself is dangerous, but because it's a large predatory fish sitting high enough on the food chain that its mercury levels are worth monitoring. Now imagine an animal sitting even higher. A bear, a wolf, an orca. The chemical load inside those animals isn't just higher than tuna's, it's often extraordinary. And that's before you even factor in parasites. Predators eat raw flesh constantly, and their tissues host parasites that have evolved right alongside that lifestyle for millions of years. The most infamous is a tiny organism called Trichinella, which lives in the muscle tissue of carnivores. If a human eats infected meat without cooking it properly, the larvae hatch in the intestine and migrate straight into the muscles, swelling, fever, severe pain, and historically, cases that were often fatal. Bear meat is one of the most well-documented sources of Trichinella in the world, and it happens to be one of the few large predators humans have actually eaten with any regularity throughout history. Every culture that ate bear knew it had to be cooked thoroughly. Not for the taste, but because the consequences of skipping that step were brutal. Now scale that idea up to a true apex predator, an animal that has spent years, sometimes decades, silently accumulating parasites, toxins, and biological baggage from everything it's ever eaten. Your body was never built to absorb that. But here's the part that makes this whole thing even more fascinating. There's a force even older than the chemistry, something that evolved inside us long before any of this was understood scientifically. It's disgust. Researchers studying food psychology have found that humans carry an instinctive aversion to the idea of eating carnivores. And it isn't purely cultural. It shows up in children before they've ever been taught it, and it shows up consistently across cultures with zero historical contact with one another. Psychologist Paul Rosen at the University of Pennsylvania spent decades studying this exact disgust response and found that humans categorize carnivore meat as deeply aversive at what feels like a pre-rational level, before conscious reasoning even kicks in. The evolutionary logic is straightforward. Ancestors who felt nothing about eating a predator sometimes died from the toxins or parasites packed inside apex carnivores. Ancestors who felt an inexplicable gut-level resistance to the idea, who found it unappetizing without knowing exactly why, survived and passed that reaction down. You inherited it. If someone asked you right now to imagine biting into a juicy wolf steak, something in you would react before your brain even finished processing the sentence. That's not culture talking. That's millions of years of ancestral survival encoded straight into instinct. Here's the twist, though. The rule isn't absolute, and the exceptions reveal something worth noticing. Humans do eat some predatory animals, carefully. Certain predatory fish, alligator, bear in some regions, shark in a few cultures, squid and octopus, both ferocious hunters in their own right. What all of these have in common is that they either sit low enough on the food chain or get eaten rarely enough that the toxic and parasitic load stays manageable. The rule was never eat a predator. It's that the higher up the chain you go, the more dangerous the accumulation becomes. And the animals sitting at the very top, lions, wolves, orcas, tigers, have spent their entire lives concentrating everything the world beneath them absorbed. They're not just animals at that point. They're living archives of everything the food chain below them has touched. And eating one means consuming all of that at once, compressed and stored. Your body already knew this. Your ancestors learned it the hard way, so you never had to. Which brings us to the part that reframes your next meal entirely. Every animal you've ever eaten, chicken, beef, fish, sat low enough on the chain that the chemical load was survivable, low enough that the parasite risk stayed manageable, low enough that your ancient disgust reflex never even fired. The food on your plate every single day is the output of millions of years of selection pressure, not a random cultural preference. Your entire culinary tradition was shaped by survival logic older than language itself. That cow on your plate isn't just food. It's the end result of a biological calculation your ancestors ran, generation after generation, without ever writing a single word of it down. And the animals at the very top of the chain, the ones you'd never think to eat, sit there precisely because that's where the danger concentrates hardest, at every level, in every form. Predators aren't just risky to hunt, they're risky to eat. The entire system was quietly engineered to keep you away from them. And without a single chemistry textbook, without a microscope, without any concept of what a toxin or a parasite actually was, your ancestors already knew. They passed that knowledge down the only way evolution ever really can. They made it feel wrong. And you're here today, eating exactly what you eat, because it worked.